pleasant good day to all of our friends. Welcome again to Marriage Encounter. We're delighted to be with you. I was contemplating being back here to continue that very intriguing discussion that we had last week. We are happy that you have joined us, and we trust that your spouse is also listening at this time. If they're not, and you can call them up. We know that some persons are at work. In some work environments, they do allow for individuals to listen to a transistor radio. So that may be a good thing if you're able to do that. Otherwise, at 6:30 this evening, there's a repeat broadcast for those who can't listen at this time of the day. Well, with me is Dr. Braithwaite. Welcome, Doctor.
Good day, everybody. Excited to be back and to be able to share once again on Marriage Encounter. We always look forward to this time every single week to be out here sharing with you. Trust that you enjoyed our last session. And as Dr. Greene said, call your spouse, but call somebody else. Let them know that Marriage Encounter is on. We never have seen it before. Always good to have new viewers and new listeners. So let somebody know that they're on Second Advent Radio or on SLC Adventist, our YouTube channel. You can view Marriage Encounter.
Well, we want to begin today with a word of prayer, shall we? Father, be with us as we go into today's discussion. Guide us and grant that the information presented will prove meaningful to those who listen.
Yes.
So we thank you for your presence and your guidance in Jesus' name.
Amen. Amen.
Last week, we ended by considering the fact that holiness, the virtue, the value that we're talking about. We have been talking about values, and this final value is holiness. And we said one of the things that holiness does in a relationship is that it hinders the development of anything toxic in your heart.
Yes, yes.
That's a big one. That's a tall order. So nothing toxic. And I ended by saying that we're talking about knowing what ticks you off, emotional intelligence.
Yes.
And be able to say, if I have a problem in this area, if I'm challenged here, I need to work on this. I need to pray about this because I want not to harbor toxicity in my heart.
Yeah. So, a real challenge and the ability to appreciate or to recognize where you may have that weakness is important. You spoke about emotional intelligence, the ability to understand how things impact you and how you also impact other people emotionally based on your willingness to observe or relate to particular situations in a person's life. So I think, Doc, as we consider this whole issue of toxicity and having purity of heart, it really comes back down sometimes to our very values, the things that we that guide us, and how we are able to manage our life, so to speak, in any given environment, particularly in the context of marriage.
You mentioned something there that I want to go back to now, because I commented that the whole concept of holiness from the perspective of not allowing anything toxic to go in my heart means that I have to be emotionally intelligent. Yes. I have to know the things that tick me.
Yes.
And you added a very important dimension that I want us to explore a little bit, because you're saying not only should I know what would push me over the edge,
yes.
but what behavior of mine would push my spouse over the edge.
Yes.
And I thought that was so very interesting, because now I want to be sure that my actions do not make my spouse toxic.
Right.
So if I know that my spouse will get pushed over the edge by a particular behavior, then I have to be careful, because I don't want toxicity
in the relationship.
to go in the relationship. And therefore, taking responsibility for my own actions and not to be the cause of creating that.
For my spouse,
That I think is interesting.
And it is important because, and that is in essence what emotional intelligence is all about. It's about understanding the other person and operating and acting in a way where you do not push that person over the edge. And particularly, interestingly, and I say this, and it might sound so weird, but, some people operate in certain ways intentionally, because they know that a certain action or behavior does cause the other person in their life to not be very happy. And some persons deliberately do it. And that is number one, lacking emotional intelligence. And in the case where you're not aware, it's, taking the time to develop that awareness. I notice certain things about my spouse. And I'm talking about my spouse. There's some little basic things that I notice. If I do this, my wife is in a much better place. If I don't do this, she's not in a great place. And so because it's somebody I love, and because we're part of a team, Doc, as we always say, I want the team to be happy.
Well, Doc, you said just now that some people are deliberate.
Yes.
I coming more on a colloquial level, you never say, I'm going to do this to spite him.
Right.
I'm going to do this to spite her.
Right. Right.
So
right.
The spouse may have done something that wasn't the best, or at least in terms of how they interpreted it. And so they decided that they're going to
get back. Yeah.
And when we try to get even, what does it do to the relationship? It may give us a sense of satisfaction. Because again, I may win this battle, but if I win and my spouse loses, then the relationship loses.
Absolutely.
So we have to resist that. That is something on your checklist that you have to cross off and say, this can't work. This has to go out the window. Because this is going to create toxicity.
Yeah. And some unfortunately, some relationships exist in an environment of toxicity because it's, as you said locally, I'll use the term, it's do for do. If you do me this today, I'm going to, and I'm not, as we say, I am not taking no last lick, right? So you hurt me today, guaranteed that before this week is out, there is something that I'm going to do to get back at you, to spite you, and it's something that I know will make you toxic.
I mean, that terminology just took me back to childhood, not taking any last lick.
Yeah.
But again, as children, and you determine that you're not going to take last lick. Some persons may not appreciate what we're talking about here, but you're not going to be the last person to suffer. You want to be on the winning side.
Right.
You must hit the last punch.
Right.
And the idea here is that you walk away feeling a sense of victory. You conquered. But again, and friends, we want you to pay attention to this. We have said it 1,000 times, but we're going to say it again. You are not in competition with your spouse. You're on the same team. Yes. And if you are not going to be the one who walks away saying, I'm making the sacrifice for my spouse, if you must always walk away saying, I conquered, I won this argument, I came out on top. If you come out on top, it means that your spouse is not on top.
Right.
And that is putting yourself up against your spouse, so you're competing. If a cricketer or a footballer or a basketball player, I'm using several sports because I know people have different preferences, but any one of those individuals who begins to think, my aim is to show that I'm the best on this team, so I refuse to share the ball, I refuse to cooperate with my teammates, the team is not going to win.
Cannot win. Cannot.
Because that element of selfishness, it might as well you be the one-man team.
That's right.
And it's the same thing in your marriage.
Yeah.
You have to recognize that you come to the game as equal partners. So very important, Doc. And I think when we recognize that we are on the journey together, it changes our approach to the whole scenario. I mean, we talk about cricket, and everybody speaks about. I remember when I think it was Lara that broke a particular record. But the team lost the game, the match, and so sometimes, we talk about winning the battle but losing the war. You can be so self-interested in something that you are so, determined that I'm going to win this, I'm going to get what I want. We spoke about, last week we spoke about wanting to get this sports car, and so because I'm so intent on getting this sports car, I'm thinking about myself. My spouse is not able to get that degree that you spoke about would give us long-term benefits, and so,
my wife now, because of the fact that I have been so selfish and so self-interested, may end up, being angry at me, creates a certain, I'm pushing it in her face. I got my car, this lovely car, and I'm driving my car. She might even want to ride in the car.
I was just going to say, she might just resent that selfish action of yours.
Yes.
To the point where she just tells herself, I'm
not even going in the car.
Go into that car.
And so, you would have damaged the relationship at a level that was painful for all. If you had waited, you may be able to get a nice car at some other point, but you were so selfish, you were so self-interested at the point. And so, that type of thing can lead to a measure of toxicity. You use the word that I was, going to use a little later, but that word called resentment. People end up resenting others because they feel like, the person is only interested in their own desires, and that's, unfortunate, very, very unfortunate for a relationship.
So suppose you decide you are going to practice this value of holiness. Mm-hmm. You are going to do nothing to the best of your ability to create toxicity in your heart or in the heart of your spouse. Yeah. You're going to treat your spouse with respect, and you are going to demonstrate forgiveness, love, humility. Mm-hmm. You're going to do these things. Can you begin to imagine the impact it will have on your relationship? Now, just suppose you make that decision. You have been in a toxic relationship. And even without your spouse agreeing to this, mm-hmm. you make that decision. And you begin to exhibit changed behavior. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you know how that is going to impact your spouse? Definitely. Your spouse is going to begin to think, am I in the same house with the same man or same woman? Right. Something is different here. Yeah. But guess what? Even if because maybe of self and don't want to admit certain things, but it's not going to take long before your spouse realizes, I kind of enjoy living like this.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a better way to live. And, if we can just maybe highlight a few examples of what maybe a toxic relationship looks like, which is unfortunate in terms of sometimes the shouting, the arguing, the use of demeaning and language that puts down, passive-aggressive behavior, not talking, simply, staying at arm's length with your spouse, and it creates a lot of barriers, a lot of hurtful moments, as opposed to, softening your tone, speaking with a certain love and a certain interest in the other person, and addressing matters that are potentially difficult with a certain amount of finesse, if you can use that word. It brings a different tone to the relationship. I'm always looking out for your best interest, and even when I'm upset, you feel as though we've been through a discussion. And I feel when at the end of the discussion and when we would have worked to resolve the conflict, I feel like even though it was a very difficult discussion, I feel like my spouse still loves me. You know what I mean? I feel loved in the experience, and I don't feel beaten up as though I just came out, of World War III.
I think, seriously, folks need to consider what kind of atmosphere do you want at home? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The environment where you live. Because we're talking about toxic relationships here, if the environment is one where there is so much tension that you are uneasy, that you are not comfortable going there because you feel that you're going into a war zone, that is impacting you in more ways than you recognize.
Absolutely.
It is, might I say, it is shortening your life.
Yes.
I mean,
that's so true.
You will get high blood pressure.
That's
you will
right.
get all kinds of emotional challenges.
That's right.
And so that is going to be something that is not good for you.
Yeah.
Definitely.
I mean, you mentioned that quite lightly about the fact that it shortens your life. Mm-hmm. Because anything that it creates stress and creates tension in your body, does literally shorten your lifespan in terms of, how it impacts the body. So, it's really something to be aware of. But Pastor, as we continue this discussion, on toxicity. I mean, it conjures up so many images in my mind as I've come across different relationships and have had moments to talk to persons, and I realize that some people, the environment is just always toxic. It's an environment where almost as though the relationship can't function without that toxicity. For some reason, that is the environment that they nurture, maybe unbeknownst to them. My question today is, how can I, and I may have spoken to it to some extent, but how can I, after identifying that this is toxic, how can I work towards resolving or changing that environment?
I mean, that's an excellent question, Doc, and I'm glad you raised it, because I think sometimes what we have to understand, and I wanted to highlight two things, perhaps three. One is, when you are toxic, when you're existing in that relationship, earlier we mentioned the word resentment.
Yes.
You begin to hate your spouse.
Yes.
You begin to wish evil of your spouse. You begin to want to do things to make them uncomfortable, so you're going to have to make a decision that you are going to love and demonstrate that love, right? Mm-hmm. I think that is important. I think secondly, you want to be a better person. Mm-hmm. You can say, change is going to begin with me. So accept the challenge to become a change agent.
Yes.
And do things. We have to get to the point where we can act and enjoy life and make life fulfilling, just as an individual. So if your spouse does not cooperate with you, and I'm going to use an example here. You go to church and you want your spouse to come to church with you. And because your spouse is not coming, that always creates an argument. It always creates strain and tension and frustration. Well, you have to get to the point where you respect your spouse's views, and where you can love your spouse in spite of, and where you can leave and say, honey, I'm going to church, see you later. And that change of behavior can begin to impact your spouse. So do the thing that is right, even if your spouse is not on board with you. And respect the fact that your spouse is an individual. In other words, I think sometimes, Dr. Braithwaite, a lot of times when we have these toxic relationships is because I want this person to do that. And if they don't do it according to my dictates, then I become upset and angry and I say things to, so I'm going to have to now respect the choices of that individual.
Very, very important point. One of the key elements to the success of any relationship is the ability to accept a person just the way they are. We ask the question sometimes in counseling, how, what's one or two things that if you could change about your spouse, that you would change, And sometimes people they can't stop listing. What we need to realize is your spouse is who they are. And those things that you're listing are things that you would have to be prepared to live with, because it may never change. And the sooner you can realize, and I hear this, any seminar that I go to, books that I read, just as we stay on the cutting edge of marital life education, persons will say one of the best decisions that you can make for your life and for your relationship is to come to the place where you realize and accept your spouse the way that they are.
When I ask the question, because you can ask the question to married couples.
Yes.
You can ask the question to couples who are preparing for marriage.
Yes.
So when I ask the question in a premarital session,
yes,
and the response is, I don't like this, I don't like that. My next question is, are you prepared to live with that reality? And if the person says, no, I'm not prepared to live with that reality, then I'm going to suggest to them, maybe you should not get married.
That's right.
Because this is how this person is.
That's right.
So sometimes I may have to advise that you delay the wedding for a year and watch to see whether there is any genuine. Because a lot of times what we try to do, Doc, is that we try to change that person.
That's right. That's right.
Which never works.
Never works.
You know,
Never works.
In fact, it makes the person more resolute in their behavior.
Exactly. And I mean, not to cut you, but I hear people say, you know, but the person can change, people can change, you know. I mean, people can change, but the frequency with which people change is very low. And, you know, the ability for a person to change is something that a person changes not because of external pressures.
Yeah.
Right? Not because you want them to change or because you're forcing them to change. A person changes because they make a choice to change. And some people never make that choice.
Well, you know, Doc, I do a simple illustration with couples, especially married couples, because I'm suggesting to married couples that, as you said, when you accept, this is how my spouse is, that's a big victory.
Right.
So I generally would have them sit side by side, and I would say to one, put your hand on the shoulder of your spouse and try to push them off the chair, you know. And, you know, sometimes they do a little, and they say, that's how you push? I mean, push the guy off the chair.
Right.
And then they would exert real force. And they would realize, and then I would ask the spouse, the other one, when your wife
Trying to push it.
was pushing, what were you doing? And he said, I'm resisting.
Right.
I don't want to be pushed down.
Oh, exactly.
And this is precisely what happens. When I try to change a person, when I try to push them, now, nobody wants to be defeated.
Nope.
And you become more resolute. So I'm sitting in the chair and my spouse is pushing me. And I begin to
more
resist.
they push, yes.
You know.
Is the harder I push back, yeah.
The harder you push back.
That's right.
And what you're doing is that you're becoming more resolute in your behavior.
Yes,
So the pushing is reinforcing the behavior.
That's right.
It really doesn't change. So I like the concept there that you mentioned. Change has to come from within.
Yes.
I have to get to the point where I realize, you know, I need to make a difference here.
For the benefit of this relationship.
And do that.
Right.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
and you, the person on the outside, cannot make that happen.
No.
Right?
Can't make it happen.
And that is the burden of many relationships. As they keep pushing, the other person becomes more and more resolute, and it becomes a battle royale. You know, it's a fight to the end, so to speak. And usually that end is the end of the marriage, unfortunately.
So when we said earlier, become a change agent, the principal person you are changing is yourself.
Yeah,
right?
That's right.
When you change yourself, you will change circumstances and you will change behaviors.
Yes.
And other persons will react to the change.
Yes.
You know, as a student of chemistry, you know, we speak about diffusion and osmosis and those kinds of things. If you put some salt in a certain solution, it will disturb the equilibrium. And the solution will kind of act to neutralize it.
Yes.
And this is what happens. When I change, when I correct my bad behaviors, when I begin to show love and empathy, then my spouse will react to that change.
That's right.
And that's what we're suggesting. So that question
Yes.
is so important.
Yeah.
You know, how do we work to make our relationships less toxic?
Yep.
Begin with you.
Begin
as
with
an
you.
individual.
Start with you. As I always say, learn how to do very important things in your relationship. And one of them being learn how to resolve conflicts, right? Conflicts cause toxicity to develop, and unresolved conflicts leads to resentment. We've mentioned that word already. So I'm saying learn how to resolve conflict. And the way that you resolve conflict in your family of origin and the way that you've been doing it all along probably may not be the best way. It's a skill that you need to develop. Get information and help on how to resolve conflicts.
But the good news, Doc, is that next week we're going to begin to talk about that.
Yes, sir.
You know, in the context of boundaries, because friends, remember, we are discussing all of this in the context of boundaries.
Yes.
And I want to highlight this point. To the question that Dr. Braithwaite just asked, how do we begin to effect change in a toxic relationship? You know, how do we grow holiness into our relationship? That's another way of putting it. And the response was that, you know, you begin internally a change in yourself. In other words, you have to accept one of the basic principles we outlined with boundaries is that there's some things that belong to you.
Yes.
There's some things that belong to you.
Yeah.
And you have to take responsibility for your own boundaries.
Yes.
And you have to tell yourself, you know, I'm not going to make somebody make me angry, make me bitter.
Right.
I'm a better person than that. And you have to learn to appreciate you and to begin to enjoy life. So make the change internal, and it's going to make, it's going to ripple outwards.
In the world, yeah, absolutely. So, very interesting discussion today. I think really kind of hits at the heart of what happens in relationships. And the truth is, it can be any relationship. It doesn't make a difference of where your relationship is coming from. The issue of desiring to have purity of heart and to relieve and to remove toxicity from your relationship is really crucial. It may not be the toxicity. We don't only think you should address it when it's regular, but you may have pockets or moments when there is toxicity in your relationship, and you want to eliminate those as well. Some person might think, I'm doing all right because we don't have a lot of it, but the truth is you want to eliminate all of it.
And Doc, sometimes one's approach can make a big difference. I'm thinking of a lot of ladies complain that the men would leave their shoes where they're not supposed to be. So let me use that example.
As an example, yeah.
And a woman may decide, I'm not going to take up those shoes.
Yeah.
And every time she comes and she sees it, a little something
welling up,
happens.
something is welling up inside.
Which is breathing the ground for toxicity. So if you go ahead and take up the shoes, when your husband comes home, say, how much money you think you owe me for taking up your shoes all the time? With a smile. That may evoke a kind of reaction in him that says, I guess I'm giving you too much work. It won't happen again.
Let me try and fix this. Right,
yeah,
right.
As opposed to getting vexed and start to fume and fuss and I'm not going anywhere with you tonight. Why? Because you left the shoe there. So your attitude, again, we're saying, be the source of change by changing your behavior.
Absolutely. Well, I don't know how much more we can say on that, but I'm thankful for the opportunity to have shared on it. And again, we always encourage you to write to us. Dr. Greene will give the email address at the end so that we can know where you are, what your thoughts are like. You know what I mean? And we can respond to some of those questions and concerns. You may have a very specific situation in your experience. You may be handling or dealing with toxicity. It may be a burden that you've been carrying for a while. You know the relationship is toxic and you want to begin to move away from that. Reach out to us. Let's see how we can assist in the journey.
That's right. Now remember, friends, what we spoke about last week and this week is the value of holiness. And we mentioned that if you place holiness as a priority in your relationship, confession and ownership of problems will become natural.
Yes.
It becomes easy for you to say, I forgive.
Right.
There would be this relentless drive towards growth and development. I'm just reviewing it now.
Yes.
And we said that you would want to give up anything that gets in the way of love, anything that gets in the way of truth, and then we mentioned this whole matter of purity of heart.
Yes.
A place where toxicity does not develop. That's where we stay for today.
Yep.
Again, if you have questions, comments, or concerns, Marriage Encounter at slcadventist.org. Marriage Encounter at slcadventist.org. That's all our time for today. Thanks for sharing with us. May God bless you and see you next week.